The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Rebecca Zimmerman stepped onto the wooden planks of Chisum Ranch's Main Street. Her leather boots worn thin from miles of walking before she'd scraped together enough coin for that final ride into Lincoln County, New Mexico Territory. It was June of 1878, and the summer heat beat down mercilessly on the small cattle town, making the air shimmer above the dried earth. Rebecca carried everything she owned in a single canvas bag, her dark hair tied back with a fraying ribbon, her green eyes scanning the storefronts with a mixture of hope and desperation that came from 3 weeks of traveling and even longer without steady work. She'd left Kansas City after her father died, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises, and she'd heard that the territories offered opportunities for those brave enough to take them, even for a woman alone. The first place she tried was the general store, where a round-faced woman with suspicious eyes looked her up and down before shaking her head. The saloon owner laughed outright when she asked if they needed help with cooking or cleaning, suggesting something else entirely that made Rebecca's cheeks burn as she turned away. By the time the sun had moved to its highest point, she'd been turned away from 7 establishments, and the small amount of money in her pocket wouldn't even buy her a week's lodging at the boarding house. She sat on a bench outside the telegraph office, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. Coming here had been a gamble, and it seemed she'd lost. The thought of returning to Kansas City was impossible. There was nothing left for her there. Going forward to another town meant more money she didn't have. She was trapped, and the realization of it settled over her like a heavy blanket. That's when she noticed him watching her from across the street. He stood in front of the feed and supply store, a tall man with broad shoulders, his hat pulled low over his face. Even from this distance, she could see the weariness in the way he held himself, as if the weight of the world had settled on those shoulders and he'd long since stopped trying to shake it off. He turned away after a moment, disappearing into the store, and Rebecca wondered if she'd imagined the brief flicker of interest in his glance. William Walsh had noticed her the moment the stagecoach arrived. In a town as small as Chisum Ranch, any newcomer drew attention, but there was something about the young woman that caught his eye beyond mere curiosity. She carried herself with a straight back, despite the obvious exhaustion, and when the saloon owner had made his crude suggestion, William had seen the flash of anger mixed with dignity in her refusal. He'd been standing in the shadows of the feed store's awning, loading supplies he didn't really need, because coming to town gave him something to do besides rattle around his ranch with only ghosts for company. His ranch. The thought of it brought the familiar ache to his chest. The Broken Creek Ranch had been thriving once, back when Sarah was alive, back when he'd had a reason to wake up in the morning beyond mere habit. 3 years had passed since the fever took her, 3 years since he'd buried his wife on the hill overlooking the creek that gave the ranch its name. In that time, he'd let everything fall into disrepair. He kept the cattle alive because they needed tending, kept himself alive for much the same reason, but the purpose that had once driven him was buried on that hill alongside the only woman he'd ever loved. He should have kept walking, should have loaded his supplies and ridden back to the ranch to continue his solitary existence. Instead, he found himself crossing the street, his boots clicking against the wooden planks until he stood before the bench where the young woman sat. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a real conversation with anyone. "I couldn't help but notice you've been looking for work." Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30 years old, maybe 32, with brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. There was something haunted in those eyes, but also something kind, and she felt her defenses lower slightly. "I have been," she admitted, seeing no point in lying. "I'm afraid I haven't had much luck." "Can you cook?" William asked, then winced at how abrupt that sounded. He'd forgotten how to talk to people, how to be anything other than blunt. "What I mean to say is, I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. It's just me out there, and I could use someone to help with the house. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. There's a separate cabin on the property where you could stay. It would be proper." Rebecca studied him carefully, trying to gauge his intentions. She'd met enough men on her journey to know the difference between honest work and something else dressed up to look like it. This man seemed genuine, if awkward, and the mention of a separate cabin suggested he understood propriety. Still, going alone to a ranch with a stranger carried risks. "What would the wages be?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Room and board plus $30 a month," William said. It was more than generous, and he knew it, but the truth was he could afford it. The ranch might be falling apart, but the cattle still sold, and he had money sitting in the bank with nothing to spend it on. "I know it's unusual, a woman working alone on a ranch. I can give you references in town. Speak to Pastor Hendricks at the church or Sheriff Morrison. They'll vouch that I'm not some kind of criminal or worse." The fact that he'd offered references without her asking went a long way toward easing Rebecca's concerns. She thought about her dwindling options, about sleeping on a bench somewhere or worse. $30 a month was excellent wages, and room and board meant she could start saving immediately. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. Something shifted in William's expression, a slight easing of the tension around his eyes. "I have a few more things to pick up. We could leave within the hour if that suits you." Rebecca stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. "Let me speak to the pastor first, if you don't mind, just to confirm your references." "Of course," William said, and he almost smiled. "The church is just down the street. I'll wait here." Pastor Hendricks was a kindly man in his 60s who confirmed that William Walsh was indeed a respected rancher, a widower who'd fallen on hard times emotionally if not financially, and a man of good character. "He's been lost since Sarah passed," the pastor said quietly. "Perhaps having someone at the ranch again will do him good. And miss, if you ever need anything or feel unsafe, my door is always open." With the reference confirmed, Rebecca returned to find William waiting exactly where she'd left him, standing patiently in the afternoon sun. They walked together to the general store, where he insisted on buying her a few supplies including a proper work dress and new boots, which he said were necessary for ranch work. Rebecca tried to protest, but he was firm, saying it would come out of her first month's wages if it made her feel better about accepting. The ride to Broken Creek Ranch took just over an hour on William's wagon. The landscape stretched out in rolling hills covered with scrub grass and dotted with cattle bearing William's brand. Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly as they rode, lulled by the rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the vast openness of the territory. William didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. He pointed out landmarks occasionally, showing her where the property boundaries lay. When the ranch house came into view, Rebecca understood what the pastor had meant about hard times. The building itself was solid, a good-sized ranch house with a wide porch, but everything showed signs of neglect. The porch railing had broken posts, the windows were filmed with dust, and the whole place had an air of abandonment despite clearly being occupied. Nearby stood a smaller cabin, which William indicated would be hers, and beyond that were the barn and various outbuildings, all in similar states of disrepair. "I know it's not much to look at right now," William said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "It used to be nicer." I've let things slide. It has good bones, Rebecca said, and she meant it. Beneath the neglect, she could see the quality of the construction, the thought that had gone into the layout. It just needs some care. William showed her to the cabin first. It was a single room with a stone fireplace, a bed frame with a decent mattress, a small table with 2 chairs, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. It was simple but clean, and it had a good solid door with a lock on the inside. He handed her the key without being asked, another gesture that helped Rebecca relax. "I'll give you some time to settle in," William said, standing in the doorway. "The main house is unlocked. When you're ready, I'll show you around there." After he left, Rebecca sat on the bed and let out a long breath. The mattress was comfortable, the cabin was sturdy, and she had work. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she left Kansas City, but it was something, a chance to start over. She changed into the work dress William had bought, laced up the new boots, and after checking her reflection in the small mirror hanging near the door, she made her way to the main house. The interior confirmed what she'd suspected from the outside. This had once been a warm, welcoming home. The furniture was quality if dust-covered, and there were small touches everywhere that spoke of a woman's presence, though they were now faded and forgotten. Dried flowers in a vase on the mantel, their color long since turned to brown. Curtains that had once been cheerful but now hung limp with dust. A sampler on the wall with carefully stitched words she couldn't quite read through the grime. William found her in the kitchen, surveying the space with a critical eye. The stove was good, and the pump at the sink worked when she tested it. The pantry was stocked with basics, but everything was disorganized, as if someone had been grabbing what they needed without thought to order. "I've been mostly eating in town or making do with simple things," William admitted. "I'm not much of a cook." "Well, that's what I'm here for," Rebecca said, rolling up her sleeves. "Do you have preferences for supper? Anything hot and cooked properly would be a blessing," he said. Then, as if remembering himself, he added, "But you must be tired from traveling." "If you'd rather wait until tomorrow to start properly." "I'd rather start now," Rebecca interrupted gently. "Keeping busy helps me think, and I think better when my hands are occupied." William nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be in the barn seeing to the horses if you need anything." "I usually eat around sundown." He left her to it, and Rebecca spent the next few hours exploring the kitchen, taking stock of what was available and preparing a proper meal. She found potatoes in the cellar, along with onions and carrots that were still good. There was salted beef in the pantry, and she put together a hearty stew, letting it simmer while she mixed up biscuits. As she worked, she began cleaning, wiping down surfaces and organizing supplies, unable to help herself. The act of creating order from chaos was soothing. When William came in at sundown, following the smell of cooking food, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and just stared. The room had been transformed. Surfaces gleamed, dishes were stacked neatly, and the table was set for 2 with steaming bowls of stew and a plate of golden biscuits between them. "I hope you don't mind that I cleaned while I cooked," Rebecca said, misinterpreting his stunned silence for disapproval. "I can't seem to help myself." "No, I." William trailed off, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "It's good. It's real good, thank you." They sat down to eat, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of spoons scraping bowls. William ate like a man starved, not just for food, but for something he'd forgotten he was missing. When he finally slowed down, he looked across the table at Rebecca. "I need to apologize," he said. "This place, it's not what it should be. After my wife died, I just sort of stopped caring about much of anything. I kept the cattle going because they needed me, but the house, everything else, I let it all fall apart." "How long were you married?" Rebecca asked gently. 5 years. "We'd been planning to start a family, But then the fever came through. His hands tightened around his spoon. She'd wanted to make this place into something special, and I'd promised her we would. After she was gone, working on it felt wrong, like I'd be betraying her memory by caring about things without her here. Or maybe, Rebecca said carefully, maybe taking care of the place she loved would be honoring her memory instead of betraying it. William looked up sharply, meeting her eyes. There was challenge there, but also understanding, and something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 years cracked slightly. Maybe, he agreed quietly. They fell into a routine over the following days. Rebecca would rise early and prepare breakfast, which they ate together before William headed out to work the ranch. She spent her days cleaning and organizing, slowly bringing the house back to life. The work was substantial. Years of neglect took time to undo, but she found satisfaction in every window she scrubbed clear, every floor she swept and scrubbed, every surface she polished until it gleamed. William found himself coming back to the house more frequently, checking on things that didn't really need checking, drawn by the sounds of life where there had been only silence for so long. He'd catch Rebecca singing sometimes as she worked, old songs his mother used to sing, and the sound would stop him in his tracks. Other times, he'd find her sitting on the porch during a break, sipping water, and looking out over the ranch with an expression of contentment that reminded him there was still beauty in simple things. They talked more as the days passed, careful conversations at first that gradually deepened. Rebecca told him about her father, a dreamer who'd been better at making promises than keeping them, and how his death had left her with nothing but the determination to build a life that was truly hers. William spoke of growing up on a ranch in Texas, of meeting Sarah at a church social, of building this place from scratch with dreams of creating a legacy. What made you choose ranching? Rebecca asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I like working with my hands, seeing the results of my labor, William said. And there's something about the land out here, the wide open spaces. It makes you feel small and significant all at once, if that makes sense. It does, Rebecca said. I've never lived anywhere like this. In Kansas City, everything was crowded, always noise, always people. Out here, you can hear yourself think. It gets lonely sometimes, William admitted. The quiet can be too much. Yes, Rebecca agreed softly. It can be. 3 weeks after her arrival, Rebecca tackled the project she'd been avoiding, Sarah's things. The bedroom that had been shared by William and his wife still contained her belongings, her dresses hanging in the wardrobe, her brush on the vanity, as if she'd stepped out for a moment and would return at any time. William had moved to a different bedroom after she died, unable to face sleeping in their bed alone, and he'd simply closed the door on everything. Rebecca approached him about it carefully one morning. William, I've cleaned most of the house, but I haven't touched the main bedroom. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to, or if you'd rather I left it alone. His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he'd tell her to leave it. Then he let out a long breath. No, you're right. It should be dealt with. I just haven't been able to bring myself to do it. Would you like help? Rebecca offered. We could do it together if that would be easier, or I can do it alone if you'd prefer. Together, William decided after a pause. Together would be better. They spent that afternoon in the bedroom, going through Sarah's belongings with care. Rebecca asked about various items, letting William share memories as he was ready. Some things he wanted to keep, a shawl that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, a locket with a picture of her parents, a quilt she'd sewn herself. Other things he decided to donate to families in need, which Rebecca thought Sarah would have approved of based on the stories William shared. The hardest moment came when they reached the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were baby clothes, carefully sewn and lovingly stored, waiting for children that would never come. William's hands trembled as he touched the tiny garments, and Rebecca saw tears track down his weathered cheeks. "We were so sure we had time," he whispered. "So sure everything was ahead of us." Without thinking, Rebecca reached out and took his hand. "I'm so sorry." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, sharing grief in the quiet room. When William finally composed himself, he didn't pull away immediately, and Rebecca found she didn't want him to. Something had shifted between them in that room, a barrier had come down. "Thank you," William said finally, his voice rough, "for helping with this, for understanding." "Of course," Rebecca said, squeezing his hand gently before releasing it. "That's what friends do, friends." The word settled between them, and William realized it was true. Rebecca had become his friend over these past weeks, and more than that, she'd become essential to his daily life in a way that went beyond just keeping house. She'd brought warmth back to his home, and without him quite realizing when it happened, she'd begun to thaw the ice around his heart. As summer deepened into July, the relationship between them continued to evolve. William began teaching Rebecca to ride properly, setting her up on his gentlest mare and leading her around the corral before gradually giving her more independence. She was a natural, unafraid and quick to learn, and watching her gain confidence in the saddle gave him more pleasure than he'd expected. "You're doing great," he called out as she trotted past him, her face lit up with excitement. "I love it," Rebecca called back, laughing. "I feel free." That laugh did something to William's insides, made something warm unfurl in his chest that had nothing to do with friendship. He tried to push the feeling aside, told himself it was too soon, that he was betraying Sarah's memory by even thinking such thoughts. But late at night, lying in his bed, he'd catch himself remembering the way Rebecca's eyes crinkled when she smiled, or how she hummed while cooking, or the gentle way she'd held his hand that day in the bedroom. Rebecca was fighting her own battle. She'd come to Chisum Ranch looking for work, nothing more, yet somehow she'd found something she hadn't expected, a place that felt like home. And William, with his quiet strength and hidden vulnerability, had worked his way into her thoughts in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. She knew about his wife, knew he'd loved her deeply, and she wondered if there would ever be room in his heart for anyone else. More than that, she wondered if she had the courage to hope there might be. The moment everything changed came in late July, during a sudden summer storm. Rebecca had been hanging laundry when the sky darkened ominously. She'd rushed to gather the clothes before the rain started, but the storm moved faster than expected. Thunder cracked overhead just as she grabbed the last shirt, and the sky opened up with a deluge that soaked her instantly. She ran for the house, laughing at the absurdity of being drenched so quickly. She burst through the kitchen door, water dripping everywhere, and nearly collided with William, who'd come running when he heard the thunder, worried about her being caught outside. They both stopped short, inches apart, and suddenly the air between them was charged with more than just electricity from the storm. Rebecca's hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in wet waves around her face. William's shirt was plastered to his chest, and his eyes were dark with something that made her breath catch. "Rebecca," he said, her name barely more than a whisper. "Yes," she breathed. "I'm going to kiss you," he said. "Tell me if you don't want me to." Instead of answering with words, Rebecca closed the distance between them. The kiss was everything she hadn't known she'd been waiting for, soft and searching at first, then deeper as William's arms came around her, pulling her close. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, matching the rhythm of her own. When they finally broke apart, Both breathing hard, William rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't sure I'd ever feel this way again," he admitted. "Wasn't sure I deserved to." "You do," Rebecca said firmly, cupping his face in her hands. "You deserve happiness, William. We both do." "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. "I think I have been for weeks now. I tried not to, tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I should wait, but I can't help it. You've brought life back to this place, back to me." "Then stop trying not to," Rebecca said, her own eyes bright with tears, "because I'm falling in love with you too." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, something broken was being mended. Something new was being born. Over the following weeks, they navigated their new relationship with care. William was determined to court Rebecca properly, despite the fact that she lived on his ranch, and they saw each other every day. He brought her wildflowers he found while checking fence lines, took her on rides to show her the most beautiful parts of the property, and spoke with her for hours about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want to build something lasting," William said one evening as they sat by the creek that gave the ranch its name, watching the water flow past. "Not just a working ranch, but a real home, a place where family can grow and thrive." "Tell me what you see," Rebecca prompted, leaning against his shoulder. "I see the house fully restored, better than it ever was. I see the outbuildings repaired and new ones built. I see the herd expanded, maybe bring in some horses to breed and train." He paused, then continued more quietly. "I see children running in the yard, learning to ride, helping with chores. I see growing old with someone I love, building a legacy together." "That sounds beautiful," Rebecca said softly. "It sounds like everything I never knew I wanted until I came here." William turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca Zimmerman, I know we haven't been together long by conventional standards, and I know some might say I'm rushing things, but out here, life can be hard and short, and when you find something real, you hold on to it. I love you. I want to build that future with you. Will you marry me?" Rebecca's eyes filled with happy tears. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in late August by Pastor Hendricks, with half the town in attendance. Sheriff Morrison stood up as William's best man, gruffly admitting that it was good to see the rancher smiling again. Rebecca wore a simple but lovely dress that she'd sewn herself with fabric William had bought from the general store, insisting she have something new for the occasion. The ceremony was short but heartfelt. When William kissed his new bride, there was applause from the gathered townspeople, many of whom had watched him sink into despair after Sarah's death and were genuinely happy to see him finding joy again. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the ranch. The community came together, bringing food and music, dancing on the cleared space in front of the barn. Rebecca had never felt more welcomed or more at home. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, William pulled her aside for a quiet moment. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close as they swayed to the distant music. "Incredibly," Rebecca said, smiling up at him. "I came to Chisum Ranch looking for work, and I found everything." "So did I," William said. "You gave me back my purpose, Rebecca. You made me want to build and dream again. Made me want to live again." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining not just of bodies but of hearts and futures. Afterward, lying in the bedroom they now shared, the one Rebecca had helped William reclaim from the past, they talked about their plans. "I want to expand the ranch," William said, running his fingers through Rebecca's hair. "Maybe buy some of the land to the east, the property with the good water access, and I want to breed horses like I mentioned. Good working horses are always in demand." "I'd like to start a garden," Rebecca said. A proper one with vegetables and herbs, maybe some fruit trees. And someday, when we have children, I want them to grow up knowing how to work the land, how to appreciate what we have here. Children, William repeated, and there was wonder in his voice. I'd given up on that dream. Well, dream it again, Rebecca said, kissing him softly. We have all the time in the world to build our life together. The next months were a blur of activity and happiness. True to his word, William began expanding the ranch. He hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were grateful for steady employment. With their help, he was able to purchase the eastern property and begin bringing and breeding stock, carefully selected horses that would form the foundation of what he hoped would become a renowned breeding program. Rebecca threw herself into her own projects with equal enthusiasm. She established her garden, spending hours planning and planting, creating neat rows of vegetables and a separate section for herbs. She also took over the ranch's bookkeeping, discovering she had a head for numbers and organization that helped streamline their operations. But more than the physical work, what made this time special was the deepening of their relationship. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, discovered how to work together and support each other. William learned that Rebecca needed quiet time in the mornings to gather her thoughts, and Rebecca learned that William processed problems by talking them through, needing a patient listener. They had their first real argument in October, when William made a major purchase without consulting Rebecca first. He'd bought a prize stallion from a rancher in Texas, spending a significant amount of money, and while Rebecca understood the logic of the investment, she was hurt that he hadn't discussed it with her first. I thought we were partners, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Partners discuss major decisions together. You're right, William admitted after his initial defensiveness faded. I'm sorry. I got excited about the opportunity and fell back into old habits, making decisions on my own. That's not fair to you. You're my wife, my partner, and I need to do better. The apology was sincere, and the argument ended with both of them having a better understanding of each other's expectations. It was a growing pain, but they grew stronger from it. Winter came to Lincoln County with surprising force that year. Snow covered the ranch in December, transforming it into a wonderland of white. The work became harder, with cattle to feed and water to break ice on, but there was also a coziness to being snowed in together, spending long evenings by the fire, talking and planning for the spring. It was during one of these evenings that Rebecca shared news she'd been holding close, waiting for the right moment. William, I need to tell you something. He looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing, immediately attentive to the tremor in her voice. What is it? Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong, Rebecca said, moving to sit beside him. She took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. Everything is very, very right. We're going to have a baby. William's face went through a series of expressions, shock, disbelief, and finally, joy so pure it brought tears to his eyes. Truly, you're sure? I'm sure, Rebecca confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. I've suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. The baby should come in late June or early July. William pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass, precious and fragile. A baby, he whispered in wonder. Our baby. Rebecca, I never thought I'd get this chance. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this gift. We're giving it to each other, Rebecca corrected, pulling back to look at him. This is our child, our future, and I'm so happy I get to do this with you. The months of Rebecca's pregnancy were filled with preparation and anticipation. William threw himself into making improvements to the house, wanting everything perfect for the arrival of their child. He built a cradle with his own hands, spending hours in the barn workshop, sanding and polishing until the wood gleamed. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were, imagining the little person who would wear them. Spring came with its usual chaos of new calves and budding plants. Rebecca's garden began to sprout, and she spent hours tending it, talking to her growing belly as she worked. William was endlessly solicitous, worrying that she was doing too much, but Rebecca insisted she felt fine and wanted to stay active. "I'm pregnant, not breakable," she'd remind him with affectionate exasperation when he tried to stop her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. "I know. I just want you safe," William would respond, and they'd compromise, Rebecca agreeing to let him or the ranch hands handle the heaviest work while still maintaining her independence. In June, as Rebecca's time drew near, William's mother traveled from Texas to be with them. Martha Walsh was a warm, practical woman who took one look at her daughter-in-law and approved immediately. "She's good for you," Martha told William privately. "I can see it in your eyes. You're whole again." "She's everything, Ma," William said simply. "Everything I thought I'd lost." The baby came on a hot July night, arriving with the determination that would characterize his personality. Matthew Walsh announced his arrival with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house, and when the midwife placed him in Rebecca's arms, both parents wept with joy. "He's perfect," Rebecca breathed, studying every inch of their son. "Look at him, William. We made this perfect little person." William, who had paced anxiously during the labor, now sat beside the bed, running a gentle finger over his son's soft hair. "He has your nose," he said in wonder. "And look at all that dark hair." "He has your chin," Rebecca countered. "And I suspect he's going to have your stubborn streak." Matthew was indeed stubborn, but also joyful and curious, traits that became more apparent as he grew. The ranch thrived with new life, both human and animal. The horse breeding program William had started was gaining recognition, with buyers coming from as far as Santa Fe to look at his stock. The cattle herd had grown, and with good management and better organization thanks to Rebecca's bookkeeping, the ranch was more profitable than it had ever been. But more than the financial success, what mattered was that Broken Creek Ranch was truly a home again. The name, which had once seemed fitting for William's emotional state, now seemed ironic. There was nothing broken here anymore, only a family growing and thriving, building something that would last. When Matthew was 6 months old, Rebecca found herself pregnant again. This time, the news came with less surprise but equal joy. Their daughter, Emily, was born in spring, arriving in a rush during a thunderstorm that reminded her parents of the storm that had brought them together. "She's going to be fierce," William predicted, holding his newborn daughter with the same wonder he'd felt holding Matthew. Born in a storm, strong from the start. Emily proved him right, growing into a determined little girl who refused to be left behind when her older brother got to do something interesting. The two children brought endless energy and joy to the ranch, their laughter echoing across the property. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Matthew learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, showing his father's natural affinity for horses. Emily proved to have her mother's head for numbers, able to calculate prices and tallies almost instinctively. They grew up working alongside their parents, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of building something meaningful. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. William's horse breeding program became one of the most respected in the territory, with his horses known for their intelligence, stamina, and gentle temperament. He credited Rebecca with much of the success, as she'd been the one to suggest careful record-keeping of bloodlines and characteristics, bringing organization to what had been more instinct. Rebecca's garden had expanded into a small orchard as well, with apple and peach trees that thrived in the New Mexico climate. She sold preserves and dried fruit in town, the extra income saved for the children's future. But more than that, the garden was her sanctuary, a place where she could think and plan, her hands in the soil keeping her grounded. In 1885, when Matthew was 7 and Emily was 5, the territorial government approached William about breeding horses for the cavalry. It was a significant contract that would require expanding operations considerably. William and Rebecca discussed it at length, weighing the benefits against the increased workload and risk. "It's a big decision," Rebecca said as they sat on the porch one evening after the children were asleep. "We'd need to hire more hands, probably build another barn, definitely increase the breeding stock significantly." "I know," William agreed, "but I think we can do it. We have the land, we have the expertise, and we have the capital to invest. The question is whether we want to. We're comfortable now, we don't need this." "No, we don't need it," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "But remember when you told me you wanted to build something lasting, a legacy? This could be part of that. Something Matthew and Emily could inherit, a business that would support them and their families someday." William smiled at her, reaching over to take her hand. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best," Rebecca replied, squeezing his hand. "I say we do it. Carefully, methodically, but let's do it." They took the contract, and the next 2 years were intensely busy as they expanded the operation. They built a second barn larger than the first and hired 3 more ranch hands. William traveled to other ranches, carefully selecting breeding stock, while Rebecca managed the day-to-day operations at home. It was challenging, sometimes overwhelming, but they worked through it together, supporting each other through the stress. The hard work paid off. By 1887, the ranch was supplying quality horses not just to the cavalry, but to ranches across New Mexico and beyond. The Broken Creek Ranch brand became synonymous with excellence, and William and Rebecca found themselves pillars of the community, respected for both their business acumen and their generosity. They never forgot where they'd come from or the struggles they'd faced. When young people came to Chisum Ranch looking for work, Rebecca always made time to talk to them, remembering her own desperation that June day years ago. More than one young person found their start at Broken Creek Ranch, given a chance by employers who understood the value of opportunity. In the summer of 1890, Chisum Ranch celebrated its founding anniversary with a large community gathering. The town had grown considerably since Rebecca first arrived, and the Walshes had been part of that growth, their success helping to stabilize the local economy. As Rebecca stood on the porch of their home, watching neighbors and friends fill their yard, William came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "About that day I stepped off the stagecoach," Rebecca said, leaning back against him. "I was so scared, so desperate. I had no idea that the gruff cowboy watching from across the street was going to change my entire life." "Gruff," William protested, but he was laughing. "I was trying to be respectful." "You were sweet," Rebecca corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "You saw someone who needed help and you offered it, no strings attached. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You gave me a home. You gave me love. You gave me everything." "No," William said, his eyes serious now. "You gave me everything. You came to town looking for work, and you gave a lonely cowboy his purpose back. You made me want to live again, to build again, to dream again. Everything good in my life now is because you walked into it." "Then we saved each other," Rebecca said softly. "Yes," William agreed. "We did." They kissed, a gentle affirmation of years of love and partnership, surrounded by the sounds of their children playing with friends, their ranch hands joking near the barn, their community celebrating together. It was a perfect moment, the kind that defines a life. As the years continued to roll by, William and Rebecca faced the challenges that all couples face. There were lean years when drought affected the cattle, years when illness swept through, and they nursed each other and their children through fevers. There were disappointments and setbacks, arguments and reconciliations. But through it all, they held fast to each other, their love the foundation that everything else was built on. Matthew grew into a fine young man, inheriting his father's skill with horses and his mother's sharp mind. At 20, he took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing William to slow down slightly, though he never fully retired. Emily proved to be a talented artist, using the ranch and the beautiful New Mexico landscape as inspiration for drawings and paintings that gained recognition beyond their small community. In 1898, Rebecca and William celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children, now adults themselves, organized a surprise party, inviting people from all over the territory who'd been touched by the Walsh family's generosity and kindness over the years. The house was filled to bursting with well-wishers, and the testimonials of lives changed and helped went on for hours. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, William and Rebecca walked out to the creek that had given the ranch its name. The moon was full, casting silver light over the water, and the air was warm and gentle. 20 years, Rebecca mused. It seems like forever and no time at all. Would you change anything? William asked. If you could go back to that day at the stagecoach station, knowing everything that would happen, would you do anything differently? Not a single thing, Rebecca said without hesitation. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to this life we've built together. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Neither would I, William said. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant gold locket. I had this made for you. Open it. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph on one side, showing them on their wedding day, young and hopeful. On the other side was a more recent photograph of their whole family together, Matthew and Emily grown, everyone smiling. Above the photographs, engraved in delicate script, were the words, "Purpose found, love forever." "It's perfect," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face as William fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you. For this, for everything, for 20 years of love and partnership." "Thank you," William replied, "for seeing potential in a broken-down cowboy and a neglected ranch, for taking a chance on both of us, for loving me back to life." They stood by the creek for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Two people who'd found each other when they needed it most, and had built something beautiful from their second chances. The ranch around them was quiet, peaceful, prosperous, a testament to what could be achieved when two people worked together toward a common dream. As they finally made their way back to the house, walking hand in hand like young lovers, Rebecca thought about the girl she'd been, stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but determination and hope. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this overwhelming sense of belonging. She'd come looking for work, for survival, and she'd found home. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's capable management, with William and Rebecca transitioning into advisory roles and enjoying more time to simply be together. They traveled some, visiting Emily in Santa Fe where she'd opened a gallery, taking trips to see Martha in Texas. But they always returned to Broken Creek Ranch, to the home they'd built together. Grandchildren came, filling the house with new laughter and life. Matthew married a schoolteacher from town, and they had 3 children who loved spending time with their grandparents, learning about the ranch and hearing stories of how things used to be. Emily married an artist she met through her gallery work, and they had twin daughters who inherited their mother's talent and their grandfather's determination. On their 30th anniversary, Rebecca and William took a day away from the ranch, riding out to a hilltop that overlooked their entire property. From this vantage point, they could see everything they'd built, the house they'd restored together, the barns and corrals, the pastures with horses and cattle, the creek winding through it all. "Look at what we did," Rebecca said softly, her hand in William's. "Look at what we built from nothing." "Not from nothing," William corrected gently. "From hope and hard work and love. From 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and held on tight." "Do you think about how close we came to missing each other?" Rebecca asked. "What if you hadn't been in town that day? What if you hadn't walked across the street?" "I think some things are meant to be," William said. "I think you were meant to come to Chisum Ranch, and I was meant to hire you, and we were meant to fall in love and build this life together. It wasn't chance, Rebecca. It was fate." "Then I'm grateful to fate," Rebecca said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And I'm grateful to you for every day we've had together, for every day we'll have." They sat on that hilltop for hours, watching the sun move across the sky, talking about their memories and their hopes for the future. They spoke of their children and grandchildren, of the legacy they'd leave behind, of the love that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, they made their way back down to the ranch. The house that had once been cold and empty now glowed with warmth and welcome, smoke rising from the chimney where their family waited inside, preparing for the anniversary dinner that would bring everyone together. "Ready to face the chaos?" William asked with a smile as they approached the house, hearing the chatter and laughter from inside. "Always, as long as I'm facing it with you," Rebecca replied, and they walked inside together, into the warmth and love of the family and life they'd created. The years continued their steady march, as years do. William and Rebecca grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps slower but no less purposeful. They watched with pride as their children took over the ranch completely, running it with the same dedication and love that had built it. They delighted in their grandchildren, spoiling them appropriately and passing on stories and wisdom. In 1908, as they celebrated their 30th year since Rebecca first arrived in Chisum Ranch, the town threw a celebration in their honor. The mayor gave a speech about how the Walsh family had been instrumental in the development and prosperity of the community. There were testimonials from the now middle-aged men who'd gotten their start as ranch hands at Broken Creek, from families who'd been helped during hard times, from neighbors who'd benefited from William and Rebecca's generosity and leadership. 30 years ago, Rebecca said when called upon to speak, her voice still strong despite her age, "I came to this town with nothing but a desperate hope for work, any work that would allow me to survive. A lonely cowboy took a chance on me, gave me a job when no one else would, and in doing so, he gave me everything. He gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through every day since. This town, this community, all of you have been part of our journey, and we're grateful beyond words for the life we've been able to build here." William stood beside her, his hand on the small of her back, a gesture so familiar and natural that most people probably didn't even notice it. But Rebecca noticed. She always noticed the small ways he showed his love, the little touches and gestures that said more than words ever could. "I was lost," William added, his voice carrying across the crowd. Lost in grief and purposelessness, just going through the motions of living without really being alive. Rebecca didn't just come to work at my ranch. She brought life back to a dying place and hope back to a man who'd forgotten how to feel it. Everything good in my life is because she chose to stay, chose to love me, chose to build this life with me. She's the best decision I ever made, and I thank God every day that I had the courage to cross that street and offer her a job. The celebration continued long into the night, but eventually, William and Rebecca slipped away, walking slowly back to their ranch under a canopy of stars. The summer night was warm and gentle, and the sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, crickets singing in the grass were as familiar as their own heartbeats. "Tired?" William asked as they reached the porch. "A little," Rebecca admitted, "but happy. So very happy." They sat together on the porch swing William had built years ago, swaying gently, watching the stars wheel overhead. They didn't need to talk, comfortable in the silence that came from 30 years of knowing each other completely. Rebecca's head rested on William's shoulder, his arm around her holding her close, and they were content. "You remember the storm?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "The day everything changed between us." "I remember every detail," William replied. "You came running in, soaking wet, laughing, and something just broke open inside me. I'd been fighting my feelings for you for weeks, and in that moment I couldn't fight anymore, didn't want to." "Best storm of my life," Rebecca said with a soft laugh. "Changed everything." "No," William corrected gently. "You changed everything. You, Rebecca. You came to town looking for work, and you gave a lonely cowboy his purpose back. You gave me a reason to care again, to build again, to love again. You took a broken ranch and a broken man and made both whole." "We made each other whole," Rebecca said, tilting her face up to kiss him softly. "That's what love does. It completes us." They sat on the porch until late, neither wanting to break the spell of the perfect night. When they finally went inside, they walked through their home, looking at all the familiar things that told the story of their life together. Photographs of their children at various ages, artwork Emily had created, ribbons Matthew's horses had won at fairs, grandchildren's drawings stuck to surfaces with tacks. In their bedroom, the room they'd reclaimed together all those years ago, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage. As they lay together in the darkness, Rebecca's head on William's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they'd built. "William," she whispered. "Yes, love, thank you. For taking a chance on a desperate woman looking for work. For seeing something in me worth believing in. For loving me. For giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you," William replied, his voice thick with emotion, "for staying, for loving me back, for making every day of the past 30 years worth living. I love you, Rebecca Walsh. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Rebecca said, "always and forever." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and had built something extraordinary from their love. Outside, the ranch slept around them, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what they'd achieved together. The years that followed were gentle ones. William and Rebecca spent their days in comfortable routines, helping where they could with the ranch but mostly enjoying their time together. They walked daily, weather permitting, around the property they loved, talking about anything and everything. They read together in the evenings, played with their grandchildren when they visited, and simply enjoyed the peace that came with a life well lived. In the summer of 1912, they celebrated 50 years since the day Rebecca stepped off that stagecoach, though they'd only been married for 34 of those years. The family gathered for a big celebration. 3 generations coming together to honor the couple who'd built the foundation they all stood on. Matthew gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. My parents taught me that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about having the courage to get back up, to try again, to believe in possibilities even when everything seems impossible. My father was lost, and my mother was desperate, and somehow, miraculously, they found each other. They built this ranch, this family, this legacy not through luck but through love and determination and an unwavering commitment to each other and to doing what was right. Everything I am, everything we all are, is because of the example they set. To William and Rebecca Walsh, the best parents, grandparents, and role models anyone could ask for. That night, after everyone had gone home or retired to their rooms, William and Rebecca once again found themselves on the porch, watching the stars. They were in their 70s now, their bodies slower and more fragile, but their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, tempered and refined by decades of partnership. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked, a question they'd asked each other at various milestones over the years. "None," William said firmly. "Not a single one. You." "Only that I didn't come to Chisum Ranch sooner," Rebecca said with a gentle laugh. "Think of all the extra years we could have had." "We have the years we have," William said philosophically. "And they've been good years, Rebecca." "The best years. I'm a lucky man." "We're both lucky," Rebecca corrected. "Lucky we found each other, lucky we had the courage to take chances, lucky we built something that will outlast us." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before William spoke again. "The ranch will be fine after we're gone. Matthew has it well in hand and the grandchildren are learning fast. Our legacy is secure." "I know," Rebecca agreed. "We did good, William. We built something that will matter for generations." "We did," William confirmed, pulling her closer. "We did very good indeed." As they sat together under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by everything they'd built, Rebecca thought back one last time to that desperate girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but hope and determination. She'd come looking for work, for survival, never dreaming she'd find love, purpose, and a home that would become her whole world. And William, holding his wife close, remembered the broken man he'd been, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive, until a young woman with green eyes and a straight back had walked into his life and changed everything. He'd offered her a job, but she'd given him so much more. She'd given him back his life. Together, they'd built something beautiful from their second chances, proving that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to discover your purpose. Their story was written in every board of the ranch house, every fence post on the property, every horse bearing their brand, and most importantly, in the family they'd created, a family built on love, respect, and the unwavering belief in each other. The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch, neither wanting to break the peaceful spell. Tomorrow would bring new joys and new challenges, as every day did, but tonight was for remembering, for gratitude, for love. Tonight was for two people who'd found each other when they needed it most, and had held on tight for the beautiful ride that followed. As the moon rose higher, casting silver light over Broken Creek Ranch, William and Rebecca Walsh sat together, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, living proof that sometimes the best things in life come not from careful planning but from the courage to take a chance on a stranger, the wisdom to see potential where others see problems, and the strength to choose love even when it seems impossible. They'd both come to that crossroads in Chisum Ranch as broken people looking for something they couldn't quite name, and they'd found everything they'd ever needed in each other. Their story would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. A family legend about the lonely cowboy and the desperate woman who'd found each other and built an empire of love. But for William and Rebecca themselves, it wasn't a legend or a story. It was simply their life, beautiful in its ordinariness, extraordinary in its love, and absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. And so, under the endless stars of the New Mexico sky, on the porch of the home they'd built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and deeply loved, William and Rebecca Walsh held each other close and counted their blessings, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had led them to this perfect now. They'd come to each other looking for one thing and found everything, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.